Good morning. Welcome to chapter 12. We have a couple chapters left until the final exam, and this is one of them. I'm not using the slides that are on the Canvas webpage. I've decided to modify my older slides. There was just more content, and I think you'll find them they have a little bit more depth and are more current than the ones that I had previously uploaded that were more recent, but a little bit with less depth. So let's get started. So this very important chapter on managing individuals in a diverse workforce. So let's just get started. This is an older chart from the author, which is a prediction of race by population from '05 to 2070. So obviously the data up to the early 2000, was there, and this is from '05 to 2070. And so you see some pretty significant trends, right? And since 2000, the census 2000 was really a very important census because that's the one that I remember. I was teaching at Cal Poly, and all of these businesses seem to not have been aware of how quickly the Hispanic population was growing. It was the fastest segment of the population, and 2000 changed everything. Uh, if you want to look it up, there's an interesting story about how Sony bought Telemundo. I want to say 1996, and it was fascinating because a lot of people thought, why would this Japanese multinational be interested in Telemundo? And they thought, okay, they're trying to diversify, whatever. And it was a brilliant move because Sony bought Telemundo. They beefed it up. They brought more revenue. They had more advertising. And then when the census hit in in 2000, sorry, and it came out that, of course, the fastest segment of the population was the Hispanic segment. And back then in 2000, I remember reading that the purchasing power of the Hispanic population in the United States in 2000 was equal to all of the exports to our number one trade partner, Canada, in 2000. So it was a very powerful segment of the population. And so in early, I want to say 2004, 2005, again, you guys can look it up, but Sony sold Telemundo for, I think it was 10 times what they paid for it. It was brilliant. Uh, so that's what I think about when I see that trend, and you can see from '05 up until even 10 and 2020. Remember that every 10 years we have the census. That's the predictor right there that this 2020 census here will show a 17% growth. So it's actually kind of a fun chart to have just to see how close to accurate this is going to be. And others are kind of, the African American, the Black populations plateaued, Asians going up, kind of at slower increments, and the faster decline is with the white population over here. So now what I added here is I added some elements from the census that I really wanted to kind of beef up this lecture. And the reason I did this is because I want to make sure that we talk about several things here. We talk about diversity, we talk about income, and we talk about education, right? I have to throw that in there. I know I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are here, you're getting your education, but I'm speaking to those of you who maybe are thinking, I don't know if this is for me, I don't know if I want to do this. So this is interesting. It's from changes from 2004 to 2014 in number of men and women 25 and over who've completed selected levels of education, right? And so you see a decline in less than high school diploma. Look at male to female ratio, right? And so it's fascinating, and you will see why I'm doing this as well later on when we talk about wage gaps. But for high school diplomas, so males 10% increase, females -1. But then you look at in terms of the advanced degrees, right? There's double right there with females getting advanced degrees compared to males, and same with the bachelor's degree. And what that might speak to is the fact that women have to get the advanced degree to get a higher wage because of the again the lack of equity between men and women in terms of wage. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The next one here, by the way, you got to admit these are pretty cool charts. This one is, again, still from the census, but it's showing you from 1940 to 2013 a decrease in the amount of the population in thousands that do not have a high school diploma. And so that's a good thing, right? And more people are getting a high school diploma. And then high school, some college, interestingly, there's an increase, some college, right? And so that might be good, but the bachelor's degree, it's kind of interesting, right? Because you see a very small, increase there. Uh, for me, the way that I look at this is by reminding everyone that in 2020, the bachelor's degree, I think, is what the high school diploma was in 1900. You know, it's a basic requirement. You got to get it. This is population age 25 who have completed a bachelor's degree or higher by detailed attainment. So it's kind of showing you again how these are classified. Bachelor's degree over here at the bottom. It stops in 2014. Sorry about that. But you can see that some areas are kind of stable and others go up. But overall, you can see that there's an increase, a very steady increase. This is the disturbing one, and this is the one that I want to make sure again, it's a way for me to motivate everybody to attain a higher education degree and get that professional experience once you're done. SAT scores by parents' education. So if your parents didn't go to college, there's a direct correlation between their level of education and your SAT score. This is sobering. Again, this is all from the census and Department of Education. But if you look at the red area, if the parents are a dropout, a high school dropout, look at the SAT score, right? And you can see the increase. Look at parents with a graduate degree, the SAT score is much, much higher. So again, there's a direct correlation between education of parents and the success of their children, which is why it is a real struggle for first generation college students to kind of break the mold, right? They're in uncharted territory, and it's all foreign, and they rely on counselors, professors. By the way, I tweaked my office hours on Cranium Cafe, so now it's easier to have access to me. But anyway, just saying that, hang in there, people, and make sure you get your education out of the way. By race and parents' income. Wow. So now we're looking at, again, this is for a proportion of the state population that is white or Asian. And again, so if it kind of makes sense that also if the parents have a higher education, then their income is higher. So these are the similar groups as you saw with the previous slide. But again, showing you what you already know about the SAT. If the parents have disposable income, they can pay for tutoring for their kids to get a higher score on the SAT. Median weekly earnings, unemployment rate. I think I showed this in class before. In fact, I had that as a screensaver for a while, or a wallpaper. But again, it's kind of no-brainer, right? If you have some high school and no diploma, your weekly earning is $450, and you're at the highest level of unemployment at 14%. And just here we have with the associate's degree. Those of you once you get that, this is what the average median is at $768, and you can start to see that the unemployment rate every time you get a degree goes down, right? Bachelor's degree, 1,000 per week with a 5% unemployment rate. Master's degree, now you're getting $1,200, 3.6. The professional degree, the lawyers, the accountants, 1,600, 2.4, and of course the doctoral degree up there as well. Median earnings by major, I think you've seen different iterations of that. I don't get paid extra to recruit people to be business majors. I say power to you, follow your dream. But I also think be pragmatic, right? I told my kids, when we talk about majors, I want them to be happy and have a great major. But I sometimes think, like, if you're going to get into a major that might not pay the bills, why don't you save that for the master's degree? Get your bachelor's out of the way, get something, again, that's going to help you. And then that's my personal advice to my kids. And so if you look at the top engineers rule the world right there, right? And so that's engineers with a graduate degree for the blue line and engineers with a bachelor's degree for the orange line. And then you're getting into computers and math, and then business is right there at the top three. And then all the way down, again, social work is just horrible, but because these are the people who do such heavy lifting in society. But social workers, it's just terrible that they don't get paid well. In fact, you'll see that that's one of the lowest wage out there is social work. The humanities in biology, again, look at biology, for example, a bachelor's degree in biology versus a master's degree. I mean, no matter which area you look at, you will see that master's helps you communication and journalism. Unfortunately, there's not a big difference. I mean, there is a difference. I shouldn't say a big difference, but in terms of the areas over there, that's going to be one of the lowest gap if you look at that. All right. So diversity is not affirmative action. And by the way, that's why also I'm using these slides. The newer slides didn't have anything about affirmative action. It's a big topic, so I just threw, I thought I would refer to these. And how to build a case for diversity. So this is where the author is speaking. I always think like maybe we don't need to hear that message in California, but there are states maybe where that's a bigger issue. Not to say that there are not disparities out there in California, by the way. And so diversity may exist without a program. It's broad focus, it's not legally based, creates positive environment. In fact, companies that are very diverse are highly productive, and it's generally accepted. The affirmative action is different because that is a legal requirement. It's got a very narrow focus, and if you think about why it exists in the first place, it's to compensate for past wrongs, right? So this is, for example, of all the groups that have been discriminated, female minorities have always been the highest, have had the highest level of discrimination in many measures. If you look at getting a loan for a house, for a business, they're the groups that have historically been the most discriminated. And so if you think about affirmative action, it's one of those things that the federal government, especially because the federal government uses affirmative action for its contracts. When I worked in the computer industry, the GSA contract, the federal government contract, it's a general schedule award. That contract had stipulations around cycles, around budget cycles, and the government had to meet its own quota to make sure that it purchased from businesses that were minority-owned, female-owned, female minority-owned. So those are examples of affirmative action programs. Let's see, affirmative action programs, purpose of is again compensate for past discrimination, prevent ongoing discrimination, and equal opportunities to all regardless of race, color, religion, gender, and national origin. Where you look at diversity programs, the purpose is to create a positive work environment. No one is advantaged. We includes everybody. Everybody can do their best. It's so critical. It is so critical to focus on performance, right? This is where nothing else should matter other than performance. If you look at the big universities that, for music, for example, let's use that as an example. When an applicant is being recruited and they do get an interview and they have to do a performance. Let's say I play the violin and I want to go to one of the very fancy universities for music and demonstrate my skill to see if I'm going to get in or not, right? This is where the entire committee actually is blinded by this divider. And so the applicant comes in and starts playing. And I love that because the only thing being assessed is the music, right? The performance of that person. So again, when you look at diversity, you want to make sure that your company reflects your community, and you want to make sure that however you do everything, you rate everybody by performance, right? Let's see, diversity makes good business sense, cost savings, attracts retained talent, and drives business growth. Again, it's no brainer. Reduce turnover, decrease absenteeism, avoids expensive lawsuit. That should be the last reason to have a diverse company. You're doing it because it's a smart, right thing to do and because you're not a bigot. Let's see. Attract and retain talent. So companies that are diverse attract better and more diverse job applicants. If you guys, I think yeah, remember groupthink, right? We talked about groupthink before. And if you think about lack of diversity, I think I used Twitter as an example, the board of Twitter and how bad that went for them. And it was very insular. It was a bunch of young white guys from Silicon Valley all behaving the same and making dumb mistakes. Um, and so if you think about the diversity, what it does is it does help remove groupthink, doesn't it? You want people who think differently. You want people from different countries, different background, different culture, different ways of thinking. That's going to make you stronger, better. Let's see. It drives business growth, improves understanding of the marketplace, improves quality and problem solving. Again, think about what I just said. The service and deep level diversity, just as it sounds, right? So when you think about the surface level diversity, you look at age, gender, race, physical capabilities, and some people might have their own bias as they go in. And what happens is once you get to know someone, deep level diversity, this is where you realize the personality, the attitudes, the values, and belief, and it cuts through the initial surface level, right? And so that's what that is. When you read that, you will see that the goal is for your employees to know each other on a personal level, and eventually whatever perception they have about a person, you know them on a deep level. Let's see the surface level diversity again: age, race, gender, mental, physical disabilities. So let's get to age first of all. By the way, I have a couple of hyperlinks here. I hope they work okay. And so when you think about age discrimination, that is a really prominent issue here in the United States. And this is where you treat people differently because of their age. Performance does not decline with age, quite the opposite, because you think about people, you have the experience laced with the knowledge, right? So you have two timelines at the same time. One is you've built on knowledge, and the other one you've built on experience. This is where when you hear about leaders making decisions based on like gut feelings or following their guts, it sounds kind of crazy, but it really is just a way of saying you're tapping into the knowledge that you have, and at the same time, you're tapping into your experience, right? And so older employees show better judgment, are less likely to quit, show up late, or be absent. When I was a kid, I had lots of jobs as a kid, and one of them I delivered pizza. And I remember getting in trouble because I was allegedly driving recklessly. I'll tell you what happened. There was a really beautiful hill. It went up, went flat, went up again, and I might have gotten a little bit of air with the car as I was delivering my pizza, and I was just making sure that it showed up on time. It wasn't going to get cold. Anyway, eventually, what ended up happening is because of reckless young drivers as I was. The company slowly started realizing that the older drivers were better because they were not reckless, but also when they realized that their insurance company actually gave him a discount when they were able to show that this pizza company was hiring older workers, right? So you had less car accidents, you had less reckless driving, and you had more reliable, maybe even reliable employees. Again, I'm using a personal anecdote. Age discrimination is more pervasive than managers think. So this is the hyperlink I wanted to share with you. Let's see if it pops up. And come on. I will post this PowerPoint slide as an update on Canvas, by the way, so you all have access to it. So here we go. This is from CNBC, and it's a story about ageism, right? Of course, there's going to be an ad.
Global leaders have put their According to data from the benefits and compensation research company PayScale, the median age of a Google employee is 29. That doesn't surprise you. And just last week, the EEOC joined a class action lawsuit claiming that Google has, quote, engaged in a systematic pattern of age discrimination in hiring. So is this a case of ageism in Silicon Valley? Jeff Sonnenfeld, Yale School of Management Senior Associate Dean, joins us now. Jeff, always great to see you. Do you think Silicon Valley has a systemic problem with age discrimination in hiring?
I do think they have an unconscious Peter Pan syndrome, where there does seem to be this quest of Neverland, of little boys who never grow old. They have underrepresentations of key segments of society. There are some great women in senior leadership roles, but not too many. And then when it comes to grown-ups, there's really very few. There seem to be systematic biases. There are top leaders of firms.
Do you think it's a question I mean, it's hard to tell, obviously, and we don't have the numbers in front of us and some of the information the EEOC
I can make them up for you.
But could it merely be a more benign explanation, in other words, that it is not a systemic bias, but the fact that most of the people who have the backgrounds and skills and schooling that Google seeks are more recent graduates of the schools from which they recruit?
I don't think so. I think the bias might be conscious. In some cases, it's conscious. We certainly have seen some very prominent venture capitalists who have outright said it, and that after people are 35, they're dead in terms of ideas. Khosla has said this. Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microsystems, a prominent venture capitalist. When you take a look at Google's data, the EEOC is apparently joining what may be a federal class action suit and formation to look into this, and perhaps it's just random that it's in the 20s, the average age of programmers in Google, and nationwide we're looking at mid-40s as the average, or it's even higher in Silicon Valley, but very problematic here. So you might wonder, why is it the numbers are so much lower? You take a look at when people win their Nobel Prizes. The research suggests that the median age is 39, so half the people are past that. In fact, since 1985, Nobel Prize winners have tended, the best work has been work celebrated when they were published around age 45. There's a lot of research on this, and hard sciences and physics and chemistry, to your point, the median age is 45 at the work that people have done, this breakthrough work. You look at Steve Jobs, you know, the contributions we celebrate there most these days, iPad,
Jeff, I was under the impression they wanted around the age of 45, but it was generally for work done in their 20s, and it takes that long to recognize just how important it turned out to be.
No, you could argue that, and you could argue that it's gatekeepers in the field. It takes a while to be recognized, but you'd be wrong. Is that this is actually when the work was published, when it was celebrated, was actually work at that point, not when it was recognized, but the work when actually it was done, Michelle. It was done at age 45 since 1985 and age 39 earlier. So you look at this, and here we have the oldest presidential candidates we've ever had in history, with Hillary Clinton at 69 at the time she would take over the White House, when she steps in, or Donald Trump already 70, and Bernie Sanders at 75. The Supreme Court.
I'll say this, CBS would rue the day that they had a forced retirement age of 65 and they kicked out Walter Cronkite. It's the biggest mistake.
Cronkite, look at Bill McGowan of NCI.
We've got to leave it there.
All right, you get the idea. And so again, it's a highlight. You know, ageism is prevalent. It's out there. But I'm doing a little bit of a focus on Silicon Valley. I know we've talked a lot about, you know, the high-tech sector. We've talked about Microsoft. We've talked about Apple. And the reason that I think I highlight those two companies is because, again, these two are both trillion-dollar companies, right? There's depending on the time of day, 2 or 3, but it's remember Microsoft as the most valued company on the planet, with the market capitalization rate, last I checked, of 1.2 or 1.3 trillion dollars. Apple is number 2. So that's also why I'm using these examples. All right, let's see. Gender, right? So treating people differently because of gender, glass ceiling. So you guys have heard of the glass ceiling. The reason it's called the glass ceiling is because You can't see that it's there, but eventually you get blocked by this invisible ceiling. And of course, it applies to women. And so this is when a woman in her profession with her company can't get past a certain point. And this is, again, we're talking about discrimination, gender discrimination. Invisible barrier that keeps women, minorities from advancing to the top of the organization can be diminished by mentoring or stopping unintentional behavior. Again, another highlight on Silicon Valley. It's quite horrible for gender discrimination. Silicon Valley breaks all kinds of records for age discrimination, lawsuits, and gender discrimination as well. So let's see, this works without ads again this time. It's popping up over here. There we go. So this is very cool because it's think about this as I'm not just highlighting the problem, but I'm also showing you an example of a solution. It's a pretty cool solution.
Global leaders have put their economies into hibernation in order to slow the rate of coronavirus spreading. One of the questions now is, will this slowdown put a floor under equity prices? That's the big conversation.
My daughter is like doing.
Seema Sistani became COO of video chat platform House Party while pregnant with her second child.
There's a prototype here of the startup founder being white, single, young male, and who's dedicating their entire life subsisting on ramen noodles to build an empire. And unfortunately, that didn't look like me.
She was convinced by angel investor Chloe Sladden to leave an executive job at Yahoo's Tumblr to co-found House Party, a big risk in exchange for potentially big upside, a chunk of shares on the company's cap table.
The cap table is the legal document that records who's going to make money when a successful startup exits. The cap table is more than a legal document, though. It is the roadmap to power in Silicon Valley because the wealth that is created from the cap table funds next generations of startups.
Sladden's investing collective, called #Angels, is focused on getting startups to allocate more shares to women. The Angels have invested in more than 60 companies over the last 3 years, working with the founders to explain the upside they'll have in attracting top talent if they offer more shares to female hires. The Angels host dozens of events to discuss the cap table gap and coach women to push for more shares.
When you're negotiating for equity, there's no real roadmap to understand how you can value the equity, how much growth a company is going to have. And so if we think that in general, it's been harder for women and underrepresented minorities to even negotiate as well for the equity.
The Angels draw on their network to help place women in senior roles at early stage startups. They partner with venture capital investors, including Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins. First Round Capital's Finn Barnes has collaborated with the Angels on an investing boot camp and on a number of deals.
Their networks tended to be majority female and equally amazing to any other network that we could tap into. And so it really helped us sort of bring the diversity of their networks into our community at First Round.
The next step for the Angels, pushing startups to disclose the diversity of their cap tables.
Understanding what percentage of the cap table do women and underrepresented minorities own is going to be a watershed moment in the industry, just as getting the initial diversity reports were.
And in the meantime, the Angels are working to change Silicon Valley's power imbalance by helping executives like Sistani make sure female employees get their fair share.
Those early women who were here have helped not only define our culture and our product and our organization, but they'll also be part of the wealth creation one day should we exit.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Julia Borston in Los Angeles.
All right, so again, this is kind of a nice highlight, I think, kind of showing you how these women have found some ways around and some taken advantage of the disparity to create their own investment fund. This is kind of showing you again the disparity here for gender, right? Top earners, corporate officers, board of directors. Better yet, let me just show you from more current data sets, something from the Census Bureau, right? Let's see again. This one is not a video, so we should be okay. There we go. So this is among the educated women. Among the educated women earn 74 cents for every dollar made. I mean, that's just insane, right? That's 3/4. So when we're talking about disparity and the gap, that's one of them, right? And so what's interesting is that you find out that the more educated women get, and the wider the pay gap. It's kind of interesting, right? So if you have a bachelor, there's still going to be a pay gap between women and women, with the disparity being there. But as both decide to get more degrees, they'll make more money, but the gap increases as well, right? And so it's showing you over here the median earning for full-time year-round workers by attainment, right? And this is the age at the bottom over here. And look at that huge gap between men bachelor's and women bachelor's degree, and men no bachelor's, women no bachelor's. No matter which way you look at it, there's always a pay gap. And this is men and women full-time year-round workers by age, educational attainment. So in terms of number of full-time year-round workers, again, just think about less people have graduate degrees or bachelor's degree, so that chart makes a lot of sense, right? And because you have less people with degrees, then already you have more people working full-time without bachelor's degrees, more people working full-time without bachelor's degrees than people with bachelor's degrees. So that's why that chart looks that way. And then sure enough, when you look at men and women over here, you can see in terms of percentage of full-time year-round workers with bachelor's degree by age, you can see how the younger, women enter the field, and there's more of them, but then eventually lesser, right? And this is a really cool. If you want, again, I'll post a slide, but this is a great little tool that they've had. So over here, you can actually, it's interactive. So like, well, men, physicians and surgeons, they're way at the top. These are the guys who are just making so much cash. 480. Sorry, those are the amounts. Median earning is at 231,000 for men. For women, same profession, 166, right? And so that's just absurd. Again, the ratio is 72%, 1,000 out of 100,000. And so here we go. This is where the women are, and this is where the men are here. And this is interactive. You can mess with it. The other thing is you can actually put your occupation. So let's just say, accountants. Perfect. I know some of you are interested in being accountants. And so let's say bachelor's degree, or we could do all, right? So you could do bachelor's only if you want. And for the ratio, we're just going to keep it that way. I mean, right now we just did it by again, accountants and auditors, or I could also do by groups, right? You can mess with this to see, and again, this is straight from the census, so pretty good data there. Race, ethnicity, treating people differently because of their race or ethnicity. Employment disparities, of course, exist. Unfortunately, legislation has lessened the problem. How do you reduce it? You can eliminate unclear selection and promotion criteria, training managers who make hiring and promotion decisions. And this is another link that I have for you. Not happening. Let's try it one more time. Interesting. It worked 2 seconds ago. Let me copy it, or not. Oh, there we go. So this is from The Guardian, and this is again, I like the visual. I know you guys like the visuals too. It's showing you how would someone go about finding the oh no, sorry, this is actually really cool because also she explains where you get the data and what kind of data is trustworthy. Basically, it's an academic exercise in substantiating your claim with the correct evidence. But I like this. For every $1 white man earns, so here's showing you Asian men actually make more than white men, right? When you look at the census data, you will see that Asian Americans are more educated and make more than any other groups. But then look at that, Asian men just make more than $1, but sure enough, Asian women, already there's that disparity, right? Asian women have the highest level of education also compared to any women in the United States as a group, including, of course, white women. You get to see where this is going, right? The group that faces the highest level of discrimination are Hispanic women of all the groups. Anyway, there's again lots. This is a fun, interesting article. Well, fun, not fun, but interesting. But what I like about it too is you can actually click on states and go by state. So California, for every $1 that a man earns, a woman earns about 74 cents, which kind of is consistent with what we just saw when we were looking at some of these wages. And then the darker the state over here, the worse the disparity, right? So if you think about Utah, for example, we're talking about 55%. Half of what a man makes is what a woman makes in Utah. Wyoming, about the same. And so the lighter the state, again, Florida is 80 cents, Hawaii 79 cents, Alaska 72. So you kind of get an idea as to what that looks like. All right, moving along. Mental or physical disabilities. I got to say the United States is pretty amazing compared to a lot of the countries when it comes to bringing people in the workforce who have mental disabilities. I'm sure everybody has been in grocery stores where you have had someone help you bag your groceries, and this is someone maybe with a visible, detectable mental limitation. And what a great program that a lot of grocery stores have associated themselves with organizations where they get the most loyal and hardest working employees, and so grateful. So what a great thing for society. So mental, and then there's different levels of disabilities. I'll pull one as an example that people don't usually think about, right? When you think about disability, a lot of people think, again, mental or physical disability. So I'll highlight something for you. So a disability, mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Discrimination means treating people differently because of their disability. You can reduce that by educating and to address incorrect stereotypes, committing to reasonable workplace accommodation, and recruit qualified workers with disabilities. So this is a link to the ADA. Let's just check it out. Oh, maybe it's because I have two HTTPs, I just realized. Oh, sorry guys, I thought I had everything ready. Let's do this. So when you go to the ADA website, right, it's a very straightforward website. There's actually a link right there where if you have been discriminated against, or you know someone who has been discriminated against because of disability, you can file a complaint right here. I'll highlight the example of Walgreen. And Walgreen, by the way, has done a lot for employing and working with people with disabilities. This is an interesting case of this gentleman who went to Walgreens to get a flu shot, and once he advised them that he was HIV positive, then they said no. They said we can't give you a flu shot. Well, that falls under the guideline of disabilities, and you can't refuse someone a flu shot because they've disclosed they have HIV. In fact, there are steps that you can take. So a healthcare provider cannot refer a patient with HIV to another provider, etc. And so for that, the company did settle with him. There we go. Within 30 days of the date of disagreement, Walgreens will pay $24,000. That's an expensive flu shot, isn't it? To the complainant to compensate him for the harm he had endured, including emotional distress. So I'm sure there's been a lot of training now at Walgreens. Maybe somebody wasn't trained right. Within 30 days of they'll pay civil penalty in the amount of $15,000 as authorized by, as amended. So anyway, that's just kind of giving you a little bit of an idea to show that the disability is not always what people assume are physical. There are other areas to look at. What are the reasonable accommodations? Physical change, a quieter workplace, training, other written materials, TTYs, to use with telephone, computer hardware, software, or time off for treatment. And this is where there's a kind of a social contract too. Hopefully you work for a company that gets it and that they're doing it because they're not jerks, and they realize that there's someone who needs to be accommodated so that we can capitalize on their skills and their strength and their core competencies. Incorporating religion to the mix. So this was a highlight of a gentleman who is Sikh, and he sued the Manhattan's police department because they fired him because he wore a turban, right? And so just another level to think about. The deep level diversity, the big 5 dimensions, and other work-related aspects. So these are the big 5 dimensions of personality, right? Someone being an extrovert, the emotional stability. In management, when you take classes on leadership, which I recommend you take, Dr. Mona Farid Nejad, I always call her doctor because she's this close to getting her degree. Mona Farid Nejad, professor of doctor, she teaches leadership, and I encourage you to take her class. But one of the things that you will learn is the concept of IQ. We all know what IQ is. IQ versus EQ. You can have a boss who's just brilliant, awesome, amazing, but they scream and yell and they lose their temper. So that they might have a high IQ but a low EQ. EQ is not a real thing, but it's just a way of discussing emotional stability as a measure. Agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. And then the work-related personal dimensions. I know a lot of this is review, right? Authoritarianism. I know you guys remember Machiavelli, right? The Prince, we talked about that. Type A, type B. The type A is hard charging, go, go, go. Type B a little bit more laid back. Your type A people are like salespeople, just really high level of energy, but they're also the ones who are going to burn out. They're the ones who are going to get a heart attack. So you have to make sure you keep an eye on your employees who are strong type A so they don't burn out. Locus of control is fascinating. So locus of control is to what extent do you assign blame for things that are controllable, and where you assign the blame, right? So if you know someone who says, I can't get a job because I can't get a break, because nobody will hire me, it's never my fault, it's somebody else's fault, maybe you've been evaluated and you've been told these are the things you should improve on, and instead of doing all things like right away and please help me, how do I do it? I'll do it. You fight the process and you say, no, you're all just jerks. And you want to make sure that when you look at the locus of control, some people have a strong internal locus of control. Some people have a strong external locus of control. The example I gave you of it's never your fault, it's somebody else's fault is an example of an external locus of control. The internal locus of control is if you're maybe even too hard on yourself. Maybe it wasn't your fault, but you think oh no, I caused this. So that's the internal locus of control. And people come with different. So whenever someone's blaming everybody else, it's always somebody else's fault. And this is where you have to kind of maybe do your homework and maybe see how many, can they keep a job? Have they kept a job? Do they keep changing jobs? Maybe those things are signs. And the positive negative affectivity as well. So there we go. So, each has its own definition. So again, I know we covered this before. Authoritarianism, the extent to which an individual believes there should be power and status different. You call me boss and I'm your boss and that's it. Or another company might just call me Brian. Machiavelli, again, I know I don't need to talk about Machiavellianism to you guys. I think, it's the whole concept of the end justifies the means by any means necessary, etc. Type A and B, I think, there we go, hard driving, competitive, type A, unable to relax, type B, easygoing, patient, able to relax. So those are the 2 areas there. Locus of control, there we go, they believe their action influence what happens to them. Internal, what happens to use under your control. External, what happens to use beyond your controls, So it's a tough one to change, by the way. A lot of people with strong external locus of control, it's a tough one to change. Let's see, affectivity, there we go, a stable tendency to experience positive, negative moods and react in a positive or negative way. So if we go with positive affectivity, you consistently focus on the positive aspect, and negativity, the negative affectivity, you focus on the negative aspect. The mood linkage is bad. It's where one worker's negativity spreads to others, right? So you gotta watch that. Managing diversity, again, we're going to look at paradigms, principles, and trainings and practices. So there's different ways of looking. You guys remember what a paradigm is, right? It's a way of looking at something. I always use the example of the economy as a paradigm. If you ask someone in the early 1900s to describe what makes the American economy go round, they would all say it's manufacturing. It's all steel production, because the paradigm for the economy in early 1900 is all about manufacturing, making things. 2020, the paradigm is, of course, service, service, service. 3/4 of the economy is all service-based. And I always remind you that service can be the lawyer, that's a service, but also service can be the busboy at the restaurant. You obviously want to be on the higher end of the service food chain, which is where education comes in. And so discrimination and fairness versus access versus learning, right? So the first paradigm, the first way of looking at diversity with the discrimination and fairness paradigm is you look at equal opportunity, fair treatment, recruitment of minorities, strict compliance with law, right? I'm following the law. Access and legitimacy, now you accept, you celebrate difference. You want a different pool of employees. Why? Because it just makes things so much more awesome. Why don't we just capitalize and tap into different backgrounds, different paradigms? People from different cultures even have different paradigms. That makes us better. Learning and effectiveness, you integrate deep level differences into organization. And this reminds me of Microsoft. Back in the day when Microsoft was really having a tough time finding engineers, they realized that there were a lot of talent coming out of India. And so what they did is they started having their schools and universities in India where people could go through their program. And then actually they cut a deal with the Department of Justice so that they could get fast-tracked on visas. And as long as you have the right degree, boom, you come back to Washington State and you work there for Microsoft. So that was fantastic because they were able to tap into this talent that they were not able to find, in the United States. If you think about STEM and why we're so focused on STEM, we're focused on STEM because we have a shortage, right, of people in those fields, and that's why we've been having to outsource. And so anyway, going back to Microsoft, there were a little bit of hiccups in the beginning with cultural differences, right? A lot of new engineers coming from India, different cultures, and trying to assimilate to not just the American culture, but the corporate culture of Microsoft. And so what Microsoft did was genius, where everybody got trained. Everybody got trained in the social sensitivity, where you learn to celebrate everybody's culture. That's pretty cool. Let's see, organizational plurality, work environment where members are empowered to contribute in a way that maximizes the benefits to the organizations, customers, and themselves. And then the individuality of each member is respected by not segmenting or polarizing people based on their membership in the group. You can go through training and practices. There's awareness training. I just talked about the training through Microsoft, right? Skills-based diversity training. And then to make sure that you are meeting your objective as a company, and that your HR is doing the right kind of hiring, you do these diversity audits, diversity pairing, and minority experience with practices. So that concludes this chapter. I will hopefully, I plan on getting your next one done this week, right? Which again is the chapter on motivation. I am going to try to get a guest speaker through Zoom. Let's see if it works. But it'd be really, really cool if I'm able to do that. We'll find out. All right, you guys, flashcards. Ariel, thank you. Ariel is really doing such an awesome job. You guys are very, very lucky. You have one of the best SI ever. And so if you need me, just make sure you connect with me, email me, anything. I'm definitely not going to be as available with the group stuff. We've been talking about this the entire semester. I've been begging people to come see me during office hours, and I don't do last minute work. And so I hate to sound like a bad guy, but you have to make sure you take advantage of your group to make sure you've got everything finalized. This right here, remember this? This is my grading rubric. I just say it one more time. These little boxes that you have over here is how I'm going to be following your work, right? Obviously, you can get rid of the entire presentation checklist since there's not going to be any presentations. It'll only be your PowerPoint presentation that I'll be looking at and your 15-page report. You guys have a great day.